Vareth Prime was a beautiful world of green forests and silver rivers. The main colony sat in a valley surrounded by gentle hills. 62,000 civilians lived there, unaware that death was coming from the sky. The human transport touched down at the colony gateway just as the first evacuation shuttles began loading. There was confusion everywhere. Families rushed toward the landing pads with whatever they could carry. Children cried. Parents shouted. Colony officials tried to maintain order, but fear was spreading faster than instructions. Lieutenant Danny Cole surveyed the gateway. It was a narrow pass between two rocky hills, the only ground approach to the colony from the direction the Krithik would come. The hills were too steep for heavy vehicles. Any ground assault would have to come through this choke point. It was not Thermopylae, but it was close enough. Megan, take Pete and set up positions on the eastern hill, Danny ordered. Overlapping fields of fire. Make every shot count. Sergeant Megan Shaw nodded and moved out without hesitation. Cody, you and Nadia take the western hill. Same setup. I want crossfire on anything that comes through that pass. Private Cody Lane flexed his wounded shoulder and grinned. They will have to walk through hell to get past us. That is the idea. Dr. Yanala Korvith stood nearby, her recording equipment active. She was documenting everything. The way the humans moved. The way they spoke to each other. The calm determination on their faces, even as they prepared for almost certain death. Doctor, Danny said. There is a bunker 50 meters behind the gateway. Reinforced walls. It was built as a storm shelter. You should wait there. I told you I came to witness this. You can witness from the bunker. It has observation slits. She wanted to argue, but she saw the logic. She would be useless in combat. At least in the bunker, she could survive long enough to send her recordings to the coalition. Very well, she said. But Lieutenant, I want you to know something. Danny waited. When I started this research, I thought I would find exaggeration. I thought human history was mythology dressed up as fact. I was wrong. You are exactly what your ancestors were, and I am honored to witness what you are about to do. Danny gave her a small smile. It was tired but genuine. Thank you, Doctor. Now get to that bunker. The Krethik will be here soon. The sky turned dark 2 hours later. Krethik landing craft descended like metal rain. They were ugly ships, all sharp angles and weapons bristling from every surface. The sound they made was like thunder that never stopped. The first wave of Krethik soldiers emerged from their craft 5 kilometers away. They were massive creatures, nearly 3 meters tall with armor bodies and 4 heavy limbs. Their faces were hidden behind helmets that made them look like demons from ancient nightmares. 300 of them formed up and began marching toward the colony. In her bunker, Dr. Yanala watched through the observation slit. 300 against 6. The mathematics were impossible, but then again, mathematics had never stopped humans before. The Krethik reached the gateway pass and stopped. They could see the fortified positions on both hills. They could see the humans waiting for them. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Krethik commander made a gesture, and the horde charged. The first shots came from the eastern hill. Megan Shaw was the best marksman in the squad, and she proved it now. Every shot found its target. Krethik soldiers fell, but more surged forward to take their places. From the western hill, Cody and Nadia added their fire. The crossfire pattern was devastating. Krethik bodies began piling up at the entrance to the pass, but there were too many of them. For every one that fell, 2 more appeared. The horde pushed forward through sheer weight of numbers. Danny held the center of the pass alone. He had positioned himself behind a barricade of debris and cargo containers. As the first Krethik reached his position, he opened fire. The next 3 hours were the longest of Dr. Yanala's life. She watched humans do things that defied everything she knew about combat. She watched Megan hold her position even as Krethok soldiers climbed the hill toward her. She watched Megan fight hand-to-hand when her ammunition ran out, using a captured blade to cut down enemies twice her size. She watched Cody take a wound to his leg that should have ended his fight. Instead, he dragged himself to a new position and kept shooting. When he ran out of ammunition, he threw rocks. When he ran out of rocks, he used his fist dodge. She watched Pete and Nadia fall defending their hill. They died back to back, still fighting, still refusing to give ground. She watched Danny Cole become something more than human. He was everywhere at once, shooting, fighting, leading. When the Krethok broke through the barricade, he did not retreat. He charged into them, screaming words she could not understand but somehow recognized. They were the same words his ancestors had screamed at Thermopylae, at Stalingrad, at every desperate stand throughout human history. The evacuation shuttles kept launching behind them. Hour after hour, thousands of civilians escaping, while 6 humans bought them time with their blood. When coalition reinforcements finally arrived, they found something they would never forget. Commander Veth Sarek led the relief force personally. He had demanded the assignment. He had to see for himself. The gateway pass was covered in Krethok dead. Hundreds of them. The massive bodies were piled so high they formed walls of their own. The survivors were retreating in disorder, broken by a battle they should have won easily. And in the center of the carnage, 2 figures still stood. Danny Cole was on his knees. His armor was shattered. His face was covered in blood. In his hand he gripped a Krethok blade taken from a fallen enemy. He could barely lift it, but he was still trying. Beside him, Megan Shaw leaned against the destroyed barricade. She had lost her helmet somewhere in the fighting. Her left arm hung useless at her side. But her right hand still held her sidearm, and her eyes still searched for threats. Sarek approached them slowly. Around him, his soldiers stared at the battlefield in stunned silence. "How?" Sarek asked. His voice cracked. "How is this possible?" Danny looked up at him. There was exhaustion in his eyes, but also something else. Something that burned with a light that would not die. "We told you," Danny said. "You just did not believe us." Medical teams rushed forward to treat the wounded. Dr. Hinala emerged from her bunker and ran toward the humans. Her recording equipment had captured everything. Every moment. Every impossible stand. Every proof that human history was not mythology. She knelt beside Danny as medics worked on him. "Lieutenant, can you hear me?" "Yes, doctor." His voice was weak but steady. The evacuation was successful. 62,000 civilians survived because of what you did here. Danny closed his eyes. "Good. That is all that matters." "No," Inala said. "That is not all that matters. What you did here matters too. What your species is capable of matters. The galaxy needs to know." She transmitted her recordings immediately. Across Coalition space, millions of beings watched the Battle of Vareth Prime unfold. They watched 6 humans hold against 300 Krethok. They watched 4 of them fall and 2 remained standing among mountains of enemy dead. They watched and they understood. In her official report, transmitted to every military academy and government archive in the Coalition, Dr. Yanala Korvith included a final statement. "Humans have a saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. After what I have witnessed, I believe the Coalition must remember human history. Not because it is interesting, not because it is heroic, but because one day we may need to fight beside them. And we must understand what that means." She paused, then added her conclusion. "When humans stand their ground, the universe itself learns to bend. They are not just allies worth having. They are allies worth becoming." In medical bays across the Coalition fleet, Danny Cole and Megan Shaw began their recovery. They were hailed as heroes by species that had laughed at their history just weeks before. Statues were proposed. Songs were written. Their names joined the long list of human names that stretched back through thousands of years of impossible stands and in training facilities throughout the galaxy. Soldiers of every species began studying human history, not as curiosity, not as entertainment, as survival training, because the legend had been verified. The myths were true, and the children of Earth had proven once again what their ancestors had always known. When everything is on the line, humans find a way. They always have. They always will. Commander Vesarek refused to believe. It did not matter how many reports Dr. Yanala showed him. It did not matter that independent archives verified every claim. He simply would not accept that humans were anything more than weak creatures who told lies about their past. Words on a screen prove nothing, he said during a command meeting. Any fool can write a story and call it history. I want to see these humans prove themselves in action. Sub-Commander Dreth Volan nodded in agreement. Perhaps a demonstration would settle this matter once and for all. And so the challenge was issued. The joint training arena was located on a neutral coalition station. It was a massive facility designed to simulate urban combat. Buildings rose from the floor like teeth. Streets twisted between them in confusing patterns. Shadows filled every corner. It was the perfect place to test a soldier's true abilities. Lieutenant Danny Cole received the challenge notification with no visible reaction. He read the terms carefully. 6 humans against 20 Velnorek soldiers. Full elimination rules. No time limit. The match would continue until one side was completely defeated. Sergeant Megan Shaw read over his shoulder and let out a low whistle. They really want to embarrass us. They want to prove we are liars, Danny said. They think if they beat us badly enough, our history will stop being true. Private Cody Lane was checking his gear nearby. At 22, he was eager and sometimes reckless, but he was also talented in ways that surprise people. So, what is the plan, Lieutenant? Danny looked at his small squad. 6 soldiers against 20. The Velnorak were taller, stronger, and had 4 arms each. By every logical measure, this should be an easy victory for them. But Danny had read the same history books that Dr. Yanala had studied. He knew what his people were capable of. The plan is simple, he said. We do not fight like they expect. We do not follow their rules of engagement. We fight like our ancestors fought. Like survivors, not soldiers. The arena doors opened, and both teams entered from opposite sides. The Velnorek moved in perfect formation. 20 warriors in 4 rows of 5. Their movements were synchronized and precise. They looked like a machine designed for killing. The humans spread out immediately. They did not stay in formation. They melted into the shadows of the urban maze and disappeared. Commander Sarek watched from the observation platform high above the arena. Dr. Yanala stood beside him. She had requested permission to observe, and he had granted it, confident that this exercise would finally prove her research wrong. Watch closely, Doctor, Sarek said. You are about to see reality replace your verified history. Down in the arena, the Velnorak advanced through the streets. They checked corners with military precision. Their formation never wavered. They were doing everything correctly according to standard. Tactical doctrine. The first one fell without warning. One moment he was covering a doorway. The next moment he was on the ground with a training round embedded in his helmet. The shot had come from somewhere above. When his teammates looked up, they saw nothing. Spread out, the Velnorak squad leader ordered. Find the sniper. They spread out. It was exactly what the humans wanted. Megan Shaw had positioned herself 3 buildings away from the initial shot. When 2 Velnorak soldiers entered her building searching for the sniper, she was waiting behind a collapsed wall. She took them both down before they even knew she was there. Then she moved. She never stayed in the same place, twice. Danny worked the streets like a ghost. He had studied this arena's layout for hours before the exercise. He knew every alley, every shortcut, every shadow deep enough to hide in. He let Velnorix soldiers walk past him close enough to touch. Then he struck from behind and vanished again. Cody was the most unpredictable. He did things that made no tactical sense. He charged directly at groups of enemies and then dove through windows before they could react. He used debris as weapons when his ammunition ran low. He took risks that should have gotten him killed, but somehow they created openings instead. The Velnorec could not adapt. Their training had taught them to fight organized enemies. Enemies who followed rules. Enemies who behaved rationally. Humans did not behave rationally. From the observation platform, Sarek watched his soldiers fall one by one. His confident expression slowly changed. First to confusion, then to disbelief, then to something that looked almost like fear. "This is not possible," he said quietly. "They are outnumbered more than 3 to 1. They should be eliminated within the first 10 minutes. Dr. Yanala said nothing. She was recording everything. An hour passed. The Velnorec numbers dropped from 20 to 12 to 8 to 5. The humans had lost only 2. The remaining 4 moved through the arena like predators hunting prey. The final 5 Velnorec soldiers grouped together in a defensive position. It was the smart tactical choice. Together, they could cover all angles. Together, they could not be picked off one by one. Danny gathered his team. Megan was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, but she was still fighting. Cody had taken a hit to his shoulder that slowed his right arm, but he refused to stop. 2 other soldiers named Pete Gray and Nadia Bell completed their squad. "They have fortified," Megan said. "Standard siege formation. We cannot pick them off anymore." "Then we do not pick them off," Danny said. "We break them." What happened next would be discussed in coalition military academies for decades. The 4 humans charged. Not from cover. Not with tactics. They simply ran directly at the fortified position, screaming at the top of their lungs. The Velnorec froze. Just for a second. Just long enough. The humans crashed into their position like a wave. There was no formation. There was no strategy. There was only violence and determination and the absolute refusal to stop fighting. When it was over, 4 humans remained standing. All 5 Velnorec were eliminated. Silence filled the observation platform. Commander Sarek stared at the arena floor. His hands gripped the railing so hard that his blue skin turned pale. Dr. Yanala turned to him. "Commander, do you still believe human history is mythology?" He did not answer. He could not. Down in the arena, the humans helped each other stand. They were bruised and battered and exhausted. But they were victorious. Sarek finally spoke. His voice was barely a whisper. "How?" "They charged a fortified position. That is suicide. Every tactical manual in the coalition says so." "Yes," Yanala replied. "And every tactical manual is written by species who have never fought humans." Danny looked up at the observation platform. He could not hear what they were saying, but he could see their faces. He had seen that expression before. In old photographs. In paintings of battles long past. It was the expression of people realizing that the world was not what they thought it was. He gave a small nod toward the platform. It was not arrogant. It was not mocking. It was simply an acknowledgement that something had changed. The message was clear. "We told you. You just did not believe us." Word of the exercise spread through the coalition fleet within hours. Other species began requesting access to human historical records. Military commanders who had dismissed humans as weak suddenly wanted to know more. And in her quarters, Dr. Yanala Korvith added new notes to her. Report. Subject species demonstrates combat Capabilities that exceed all standard psychological models. Recommend immediate revision of Coalition tactical assessments regarding human military potential. Previous classifications of humans as low threat species are dangerously inaccurate. She paused and then added one final line. Further recommend that the Coalition never give humanity a reason to become our enemy. The Galactic Coalition Council chambers were vast and filled with representatives from dozens of species. Tall crystalline beings stood next to squat rock creatures. Floating entities hovered above tentacled diplomats. It was a gathering of the most powerful civilizations in known space. Dr. Yanala Corvith stood at the center of the chamber. She had been summoned to present her findings about humanity directly to High Counselor Morith, the supreme military commander of the Coalition. It was an honor that terrified her. You claim that human historical records are not mythology, Morris said. His voice echoed through the chamber. He was ancient even by Coalition standards, a being of pure energy contained within a mechanical shell. You claim they are verified fact. Yes, High Counselor. Every record I examined passed Coalition Standard 7 verification. Independent archives confirm my findings. There is no doubt. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Many species had heard rumors about the training exercise on the station. Stories about 6 humans defeating 20 Velnorak soldiers had spread quickly. But hearing it confirmed by a respected scientist was different. Marth raised one mechanical appendage for silence. Show us what you found. Yanala activated the holographic display. Images filled the air above her. Ancient battlefields, ruined cities, frozen wastelands, each one annotated with verification codes and primary source references. Thermopylae, she began. 300 warriors against an army estimated at 100,000 to 300,000. They held for 3 days. Verified. She changed the image. Stalingrad. Urban combat in winter conditions for 5 months. Temperatures reaching -40 degrees. Casualties exceeding 2 million. The defenders refused to surrender. Verified. Another image. The Siege of Malta in 1565. 600 knights and several thousand soldiers held against an invasion force of 40,000 for nearly 4 months. Verified. She continued. Image after image. Battle after battle. Each one more impossible than the last. Each one proven true. This pattern repeats throughout human history, Yanala said. It is not an exception. It is the rule. When humans face extinction, they do not surrender. They fight with a fury that defies all psychological models. And often they win against odds that should be mathematically impossible. The chamber was silent. Even the floating entities had stopped moving. What is your conclusion, Doctor? Morith asked. Yanala took a deep breath. High Counselor, I believe humans represent something unprecedented in galactic history. Every species in this chamber has myths of ancient heroes who performed impossible deeds. Only humans have verified records proving their myths are real. More than that, they have repeated these feats across thousands of years in every environment imaginable. Humans are not a weak species as we assumed. They are potentially the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. Before anyone could respond, an alarm shattered the silence. Red lights flashed across the chamber. Emergency broadcasts overrode the holographic display. Alert! Alert! Krethik Raider Fleet detected. Heading toward Coalition Colony World Vareth Prime. Estimated enemy strength: 47 warships. 300 ground assault craft. Civilian population of Vareth Prime: 62,000. The chamber erupted into chaos. The Krethik were feared throughout the galaxy. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They destroyed everything in their path and moved on to the next target. Coalition forces had been trying to contain them for centuries with limited success. Morith's voice cut through the noise. Silence. What forces do we have in range? A tactical officer responded. The Endless Harmony is closest, High Counselor. But it is a training vessel. It cannot engage a fleet of that size. What about evacuation? Possible but difficult. We would need at least 6 hours to evacuate the civilian population. The Krethek will arrive in 4. Silence again. Everyone in the chamber understood what this meant. 62,000 civilians would die because the coalition could not reach them in time. Then, a human voice spoke. Lieutenant Danny Cole had been allowed into the chamber as part of Dr. Yinala's presentation team. He stepped forward now, his uniform still showing signs of the training exercise. The council stared at him. A small creature interrupting their deliberations. High Counselor, Danny said. Request permission to address the council. Morith regarded him with what might have been curiosity. Speak, human. My squad is currently aboard the Endless Harmony. 6 soldiers. We volunteer to deploy to Varth Prime immediately. Confused murmurs spread through the chamber. One of the crystalline beings spoke, its voice like breaking glass. 6 soldiers against a Krethek invasion force. That is not a military operation. That is suicide. Yes, Danny said simply. But we can hold the main colony gateway for those 6 hours. We can buy time for the evacuation. Commander Sarek was also in the chamber. He had been ordered to attend after the training exercise. Now he stepped forward, and his expression had changed since that day in the arena. He no longer looked at humans with contempt. High Counselor, Sarek said, I have seen what these humans can do. I did not believe it before. I believe it now. 6 of them held against 20 of my best soldiers and won. If they say they can hold a position, I am inclined to trust them. The chamber fell silent again. Morith looked at Danny for a long moment. You understand that reinforcements may not arrive in time, Morith said. You understand that you will likely die on that planet. Danny nodded. Our ancestors held mountain passes knowing they would die. They defended cities with broken walls, knowing they would die. They fought in snow and blood and fire, knowing they would die. We are not doing anything new, High Counselor. We are just doing what they did. Yinala felt something catch in her throat. She had read about moments like this in human history. She had verified the records. But seeing it happen in front of her was something else entirely. This is what you meant, she said quietly. When you said your history speaks for itself. Danny glanced at her. We told you. You just had to believe us. Morith made his decision. Lieutenant Cole, your request is approved. Deploy immediately. The coalition will do everything possible to evacuate the civilians and send reinforcements. Danny saluted in the human style and turned to leave. But Yinala called after him. Lieutenant, I request permission to accompany your squad. Everyone stared at her. Danny stopped and turned back. Doctor, this is a combat mission. You are a scientist. I have spent weeks studying human history, Yinala said. I have read about Thermopylae and Stalingrad and every other impossible stand your people have made. But I have never witnessed one. I need to see it for myself. I need to understand what makes you capable of this. Danny studied her face. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. Then come with us, Doctor. But understand that we cannot protect you. Where we are going, there is no safe place. I understand. They left the council chamber together. Behind them, Morith began issuing orders for evacuation and reinforcement. Ships were mobilized. Resources were gathered. The entire coalition machinery lurched into motion. But everyone knew the truth. The outcome of this battle would not be decided by fleets or councils. It would be decided by 6 human soldiers making a stand on a distant world. just like their ancestors had done for thousands of years, on the transport ship heading toward Verith Prime. Sergeant Megan Shaw checked her weapons for the third time. Private Cody Lane sat with his eyes closed, his wounded shoulder wrapped in fresh bandages. Pete Gray and Nadia Bell reviewed the colony layout on a small display. Danny stood at the front of the compartment, looking out at the stars rushing past. "Lieutenant," Megan said, "any final orders?" Danny turned to face his squad. These people had trained together, fought together, bled together. Now they would probably die together. "Just one," he said. "Remember who we are. Remember where we come from. Remember every story of every ancestor who faced impossible odds and refused to break. We are their children. We carry their strength. And today, we show the galaxy what that means." He looked at each of them in turn. "Hold the line. No matter what comes, hold the line." They nodded. No speeches were needed. No grand gestures. They knew what was expected of them. They knew what they had volunteered for. And somewhere in the back of the transport, Dr. Yanala Corvith watched them with a mixture of terror and wonder. She was about to witness human history being written. Dr. Yanala Corvith had not slept in 36 hours. Her quarters were filled with holographic displays showing human historical records. Maps of ancient battlefields floated in the air. Casualty reports scrolled across screens. Images of ruined cities and frozen wastelands covered every surface. She had started with the stories the human lieutenant mentioned. Then she found more, and more, and more. Each one seemed impossible. Each one was verified beyond any doubt. The archive intelligence called Keeper assisted her research. It was a neutral system designed to verify historical records across all coalition species. It had no bias. It had no agenda. It simply confirmed what was true and flagged what was false. Nothing Yanala searched came back flagged. "Keeper," she said. Her voice was hoarse from lack of sleep. "Cross-reference Battle of Thermopylae with standard coalition historical verification protocols." The response came immediately. "Verification complete. All primary sources confirmed authentic. Archaeological evidence matches recorded accounts. Genetic population studies support described demographics. Battle of Thermopylae is rated as verified historical fact under Coalition Standard 7 protocols." Yanala closed her eyes. She had hoped for a different answer. What about the siege of Leningrad? Verification complete. 900-day siege confirmed. Civilian casualty estimates of 1 million verified through multiple independent sources. Surviving population genetic markers confirm prolonged starvation adaptation. Event rated as verified historical fact. 900 days. Nearly 3 years. 1 million dead from hunger alone. And the city never surrendered. "Show me comparable events in Velnorak history," Yanala said. The Keeper paused. This was unusual. No comparable events found. Velnorak military doctrine has prioritized strategic withdrawal over extended siege defense for the past 11,000 years. No Velnorak population has endured siege conditions exceeding 47 days. 47 days. Our people considered that the absolute limit of psychological endurance. Humans had endured 20 times that length. In winter. While starving, she needed to understand how. She needed to talk to someone who could explain. An hour later, she found Lieutenant Danny Cole in the observation deck. He was alone, looking out at the stars. He turned when he heard her approach, and his expression showed no surprise. He had been expecting her. "Dr. Corvith," he said. "Did you check the records?" She stopped a few meters away from him. "I checked everything. Every story you mentioned. Dozens more that you did not. And? All verified. Every single one." She paused. I do not understand how this is possible. Danny turned back to the window. The light from distant suns reflected in his eyes. What specifically do you not understand? All of it. Yanala stepped closer. Your species is small. Your bodies are fragile compared to ours. Your lifespans are short. By every measurable standard, you should not be capable of these things. Yet your history is filled with them. Over and over again. How? Danny was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. My grandmother told me a story once. During a war on all world, her village was caught between two armies. There was no escape. The logical thing to do was hide and hope to survive. What did they do? The women and old men took hunting rifles and farm tools and held a bridge for 6 hours. They were not soldiers. They had no training. But they knew that if the enemy crossed that bridge, their children would die. He looked at her. 23 of them held against hundreds. 14 survived. My grandmother was one of them. Inala tried to process this. They chose probable death over certain survival through surrender. They chose to protect their children. Everything else was secondary. But that is not logical. Surrender would have preserved more lives. Danny shook his head slowly. You are thinking like a Velnoric. We do not think that way. When everything we love is threatened, something changes inside us. We stop calculating odds. We stop thinking about survival. We just fight. With everything we have. Until we win or until we die. Inala remembered something from her research. Your species has a term. Last stand. It appears repeatedly in your military history. Yes. It means fighting to the end when there is no hope of victory. Other species would call that irrational. We call it necessary. Necessary for what? For being human. Danny turned to face her fully. Every generation of my people has known that one day they might have to make that choice. Stand and fight for something more important than their own lives. It is built into us. Our stories, our songs, our histories. They all teach us the same lesson. When the moment comes, you do not run. You hold the line. Yanala felt something she had never felt before. It was not fear exactly. It was something closer to awe mixed with deep unease. She was standing next to a creature that looked small and weak, but carried something inside it that her people had never possessed. I must report my findings, she said finally. Sub-Commander Drethvolen will want to see my research. Danny nodded. He will not believe it. You sound certain. Because believing it means accepting that everything your people think about warfare is incomplete. That there are things humans can do that Velnoric cannot. Your commanders will not accept that easily. He was right. She knew it before she even left the observation deck. Sub-Commander Drethvolen read her preliminary report in silence. His forearms were folded across his chest, and his black eyes revealed nothing. When he finished, he set the datapad down and looked at her. This is an interesting collection of human propaganda, he said. Sir, these are verified records. Coalition Standard 7 protocols confirmed each event. Then, the databases have been corrupted. Humans are clever with technology. They have altered the records to support their mythology. Yanala had expected this. I request permission to verify through independent Galactic Coalition archives. Systems that humans have never accessed. Dreth considered this. He clearly wanted to refuse. But denying a scientific verification request would look suspicious. Finally, he nodded. Granted. But I expect your next report to reflect reality, Doctor. Not human fantasy. She submitted the request immediately. The independent archives were maintained by the oldest species in the Coalition. They had been gathering data for over 100,000 years. If there was any corruption in the human records, these archives would reveal it. The results came back 12 hours later, Every event verified. Primary sources matched. Timeline confirmed. Casualty figures accurate within acceptable margins. Yanala read the report 3 times. Then she read it again. The humans had not corrupted anything. They had not exaggerated anything. The independent archives confirmed what she already knew. Human history was not mythology. It was a warning. She thought about Commander Sarek, laughing at the human soldiers. She thought about how casually her people dismissed these small creatures as primitive and weak. She thought about what would happen if the Coalition ever truly went to war against humanity. For the first time in her life, Dr. Yanala Korvith felt genuine fear of another species, not because of their technology, not because of their numbers, but because of what lived inside them. That thing that made them stand and fight when all hope was gone. That thing that turned farmers into soldiers and soldiers into legends. She began writing a new report. This one would not be preliminary. This one would contain everything she had found. Every battle, every siege, every impossible stand that humans had made throughout their bloody history, and she would make sure the Coalition understood what it meant. The humans were not weak. They were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. And nobody knew it yet. The training had been hard that day, and everyone was tired. Human soldiers and Velnoric soldiers sat in the common room of the massive starship called the Endless Harmony. They were supposed to be allies now. The Galactic Coalition had brought them together for joint military exercises. But trust was still a distant thing between them. Lieutenant Danny Cole sat with his squad near the far wall. He was 28 years old, with calm brown eyes and a voice that made people want to listen. Sergeant Megan Shaw sat beside him. She was older at 32 and carried herself like someone who had seen real combat. Private Cody Lane was the youngest at 22, and he looked up to both of them like they were heroes from old stories. The Volnorak soldiers occupied the center of the room. They were tall creatures with pale blue skin and 4 arms. Their eyes were completely black, and they moved with a grace that made humans look clumsy. Commander Vesarek led them. He was broad and proud, and he looked at humans the way someone might look at insects, pretending to be warriors. Danny was telling a story. He often did this after training. It helped his squad relax and remember why they fought. There were only 300 of them, Danny said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. 300 Spartans against an army that numbered in the hundreds of thousands. They knew they would die. Every single one of them knew it. But they held that narrow pass for 3 days. They gave their people time to prepare. Time to survive. Cody leaned forward with wide eyes. He had heard this story before, but he never got tired of it. Megan nodded slowly. She understood what those men had done. She understood the weight of choosing death so others could live. From across the room, there came a sound. It was laughter. Cold and mocking laughter. Commander Sarek stood up and walked toward the humans. His soldiers followed him with smiles on their faces. They had been listening. This is what humans tell each other, Sarek said. His voice dripped with amusement. 300 against hundreds of thousands? You expect us to believe such obvious lies? Danny looked up at the towering alien. His expression did not change. It is not a lie. It is history. Sarek laughed again. History? No species could accomplish such a thing. You invent these stories to make yourselves feel important. To pretend you are warriors when you are clearly not. The other Velnorak soldiers nodded and whispered among themselves. One of them pointed at Cody and made a joke in their language. The others laughed. Megan's jaw tightened, but she did not move. She knew better than to start a fight here. We have studied your species, Sarek continued. Small bodies, weak bones, short lifespans. You are barely suited for labor, let alone warfare. These myths you tell are nothing more than the fantasies of a primitive people trying to feel special. Danny stood up slowly. He was much shorter than Sarek, but he did not look small. There was something in his eyes that made the laughter around them fade, just a little. The Spartans were real, Danny said. Thermopylae was real. And that is just one story among thousands. Sarek leaned down until his black eyes were level with Danny's face. Then tell me another lie, human. Entertain us. Danny did not look away. Stalingrad, a city in ruins. Winter so cold that weapons froze. Our people fought there for months. Street by street. Building by building. Room by room. The enemy thought they would break us in weeks. It took them half a year, and they still lost. A Volmoric soldier behind Sarek snorted. Impossible. No species fights in those conditions. The psychological damage alone would cause mass collapse. We did not collapse, Danny said simply. We won. Sarek straightened up and shook his head. You are either liars or fools who believe lies told by your ancestors. Either way, you are not worth our time. He turned to his soldiers. Let us leave these storytellers to their fantasies. The Velmarek moved away, still laughing. But one of them did not laugh. She stood near the back of the group, and her name was Dr. Yanala Korvith. She was a xenanthropologist assigned to study human culture and behavior. Her job was to understand species, not to mock them. She had been listening carefully to every word Dodd. As the others left, she stayed behind for a moment. She looked at Danny and then at his squad. There was something in their faces that troubled her. It was not shame or embarrassment. It was patience. The kind of patience that came from knowing something others did not. Danny caught her looking at him. He gave her a small nod. You are welcome to check our records. Everything I said is documented, verified by your own coalition standards. Yanala said nothing. She turned and followed her people out of the room. But the words stayed with her. That night she could not sleep. She lay in her quarters and thought about the stories the human had told. They were absurd. 300 against an army, fighting in frozen ruins for months. These were not the actions of a rational species. They were the actions of creatures that did not understand when to surrender. Finally, she gave up on sleep and went to her research terminal. She requested access to the human historical databases. The system granted it immediately. After all, she was a scientist. This was her purpose. She expected to find folklore. She expected myths dressed up as history. She expected exaggeration and propaganda, and the usual nonsense that young species used to make themselves feel important. What she found was something else entirely. The Battle of Avash, Thermopylae, verified by archaeological evidence. Primary sources from multiple civilizations. Genetic markers in the region matching the described population. The numbers were accurate. The timeline was accurate. 300 warriors had truly held against a vast army. Her hands began to shake. She searched for Stalingrad. The records were even more detailed. Photographs, audio recordings, survivor testimonies. The conditions described were real. The death toll was staggering. And somehow the humans had not broken. They had fought until they won. She searched more. A place called Rorke's Drift, where 150 humans held against 4,000 enemies. A siege at a city called Vienna, where outnumbered defenders saved an entire continent. A frozen reservoir called Chosen, where surrounded humans fought their way through 7 enemy divisions. Each story she checked came back verified. Primary sources: physical evidence, genetic confirmation, coalition standard verification. These were not myths. These were facts. Yanala sat back in her chair and stared at the screen. Her species had been spacefaring for 12,000 years. In all that time, they had never produced anything like this. The Vilnoric valued survival. They valued logical, tactical decisions. They surrendered when the odds were impossible, because death served no purpose. Humans did not think that way. Humans looked at impossible odds and chose to fight anyway. Not once, not twice, but over and over again across their entire history. She thought about the way Commander Sarek had laughed at them. She thought about how the human lieutenant had simply stood there and taken it. He had not argued or defended himself. He had just told them to check the records, because he knew. He knew what she was. Only now beginning to understand. The humans had not been exaggerating their history, they had been downplaying it. Yunala opened a new file and began to write. She did not know what she was going to do with this information yet. But she knew one thing for certain. Everything she thought she knew about humans was wrong.